What if one of the greatest empires in the Americas didn't fall, but was silenced? Beneath the golden temples of the Inca, deeper than any treasure ever looted by conquistadors, lies a secret buried in stone. A secret so old, even the gods seem to have forgotten it. Why did the mighty empire collapse in just a few short decades? Was it disease, betrayal, or something far more sinister? In this haunting journey through lost cities, forbidden tunnels, and ancient codes, we uncover the chilling theories historians won't dare to confirm. Some say the Inca vanished. Others say they were taken. Watch this video to the very end, because the truth isn't just history. It's a warning. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next mystery hidden in plain sight. The sun that wouldn't rise. It began with silence. The night before, the sacred city of Cusco, heart of the Inca Empire, lay strangely still. No songs echoed through the valleys. No flutes whispered from the temples. Even the wind refused to move. It was as if the Andes themselves were holding their breath. And then morning came. But the sun didn't, not entirely. A pale, sickly disk clawed its way above the jagged horizon, but it brought no warmth, no light, just a dim, ghostly shimmer like the eye of a dead god staring down from the sky. Farmers froze in their fields. Priests stepped onto the temple terraces and looked up with dread. Children cried. The old ones, those who remembered the forbidden legends, simply lowered their heads and whispered prayers they hadn't dared speak in decades. The sun had not risen, and they all felt it in their bones. Something ancient had shifted. High priests ascended the steps of Coricancha, the most sacred temple in the empire, bearing offerings of gold and blood. They poured libations, they cut flesh, they chanted in tongues older than the empire itself. But the offerings were rejected. The golden bowls cracked. The blood turned black in the air. By midday, water in the sacred fountains darkened to the color of rust. Llamas refused to move. Condors circled low but would not land. And the wind carried strange sounds, whispers like voices speaking backward. Some said the sun had turned its face from them. Others whispered a different name, one not spoken since before the time of Manco Capac. According to a forbidden prophecy passed down only through the shadows of the priesthood, there was once a time before the Inca. A forgotten age. An empire that had tried to become gods and was buried for it. When the sun grows cold and the stars shift in their sky, the first ones will awaken, not from sleep, but from stone. Not to rule, but to reclaim. Deep beneath Cusco, in hidden vaults carved into the belly of the mountains, high priests removed seals that had not been broken in centuries. Inside were objects no man alive had laid eyes on. Elongated skulls with symbols burned into the bone, obsidian eyes, and scrolls wrapped in human skin. Warnings etched in a language that predated the empire itself, etched not for the living but for the survivors. In one chamber, lit only by flickering torchlight, a message was discovered carved in reverse along the inner wall. When held to a polished bronze mirror, it read, "We were not the first, we were the offering, and the debt is not paid." That night the earth began to tremble, and far to the east, near the forbidden peaks of Vilcabamba, a third star appeared in the sky, dull, red, and pulsing. It wasn't on any star map the priests had memorized. It hadn't been there before. But now, it wouldn't go away. The Inca had built their empire on balance between earth and sky, sacrifice and blessing, fear and devotion. But when that balance broke, so did the illusion of power. And something beneath the empire, something buried, began to wake. Bones in the sky, blood in the stone. No one knows exactly when the screams began. Some say it was in the mountain village of Chinchero, where the stars refused to move for 3 nights in a row. Others swear it started in the jungle, near the edge of the unknown, where the trees grow too fast and the animals don't blink. But across the empire, the same thing was whispered in the dark. Something was coming, not from beyond, but from below. Miners digging near Lake Titicaca unearthed something strange that month. A stone tablet sealed in volcanic rock, etched with a map that didn't match anything on Inca land. It showed mountains that no longer existed, rivers that ran uphill, and cities buried under modern ones. At its center was a spiral, an eye, maybe, or a mouth. The workers who touched the tablet fell ill within hours. Their skin grew cold. Their blood thickened. They spoke of voices in the stone, calling them by name. The priests tried to suppress it, burn the map, seal the mine. But it was too late. The whispers had already spread. And then came the bodies. In the sacred temple of Ollantaytambo, deep in the Andes, bones were discovered buried in perfect spiral formations beneath the altar stones. But these were no ordinary skeletons. The skulls were elongated, yes, but fused at the crown, with no suture lines, no mouths, just rows of razor-like ridges where teeth should have been. One priest, upon seeing them, fell to his knees and whispered, "They're not ancestors, they're keys." A new theory began to form, quietly at first, among the high priesthood, among the death mask carvers and the readers of the dead winds, that the Inca did not rise alone, that their sudden, inexplicable technological mastery of astronomy, of agriculture, of stonework no blade could pass between, was not entirely their own. Some began to ask, what if the Inca weren't the builders of the empire, but the inheritors? What if the true masters had only stepped away, and now they were returning? In Machu Picchu, hidden in the cloud forest, a door was found. Not a literal one, but a false wall in the Temple of the Three Windows. So expertly fitted it could not be seen unless the moon struck it at precisely the right angle. Behind it was a chamber no one had entered in over 1,000 years. Its walls were covered in carvings, constellations with 13 stars, beings with twisted limbs holding spheres of fire, a sun with 3 faces weeping. In the center stood a monolith, 9 feet tall, jet black, not stone, not metal, something in between. It hummed. A priest reached out to touch it. His skin blistered before his hand made contact. He died that night, whispering only one word over and over again, Wiracocha. Not the god, the others insisted. No, this was older than the god. This was the god of the god. The council panicked. They sealed the chamber, swore the witnesses to silence, but the silence didn't matter. The stone had begun to sing, and across the empire, animals began fleeing south. Some jumped off cliffs, some just lay down and stopped breathing. Whatever was buried deep beneath the empire was awake now, and it remembered. The Shadow Empire. There were places even the Inca did not walk, not because they feared enemies, but because they feared memory. High in the mountains, where the air thins to a whisper and the cold numbs even thought, the empire had forbidden zones. Valleys marked with stacked bones, paths where llamas refused to tread. They were called Kakyawasi, the houses of thunder. The elders claimed the gods had struck these places in anger long ago, splitting the ground open to swallow what should never have existed. But one morning, a group of messengers sent to deliver offerings to a mountain oracle failed to return. When a rescue party climbed the pass, they found the men, but not dead, kneeling, their eyes open, dried out, as if something had sucked the soul straight from them. Their mouths were torn wide, not in pain, but in awe, and drawn into the snow in what looked like blood and ash was a single shape, a spiral. Again. The emperor, Sapa Inca Huayna Capac, summoned his highest priests and scholars to Cusco. He demanded answers, but what he received were riddles, fears, and confessions. One elder stepped forward, blind, nearly 100 years old. He spoke of the first empire, the one before even the sun was born, a race not quite human who spoke in chords, not words, who carved mountains as if they were clay, who taught the people how to read stars, grow maize, and harvest gold not for wealth, but as tribute. They ruled not through war, but through knowing, through control of memory, dream, and time. But they were betrayed and buried, except not all of them. A sect of priests, long thought extinct, had never stopped worshipping them. The Yanak, or Shadow Ones, passed their rituals in secret, carving tunnels beneath the temples of light, offering not animals, but people. And now it seemed they had found something, or perhaps something had found them. Soon after the old man spoke, he vanished from his chamber. His body was never found, but his bed was soaked in a thick black oil and the walls were covered in writing no one could read. Etched backward, as if for eyes not meant to see forward, the emperor demanded the tunnels beneath Coricancha be sealed. Priests descended with torches. Only 2 returned. They carried no light. Their faces were blank. Their tongues were gone. That same night, all metal tools in Cusco turned cold. Fires refused to catch. And in the eastern sky, that pulsing red star blinked, just once. But in that blink, every bird in the city went silent. A new fear crept into the minds of the empire's rulers. What if the Spaniards were not the end? What if they were just the beginning of the reckoning? Because the stars were changing, the earth was moaning in its sleep, and the priests were dreaming of staircases made of bone, leading down into the dark, down to where the first kings slept, down to where something waited, and now it was listening, the ones who wait beneath. The mountain cracked, not with thunder, not with storm, but with a sound like bones grinding under stone. In the sacred valley of Vilcabamba, where the last Inca kings would one day flee, the earth split in a jagged scar, 40 feet long, 10 feet deep. No quake had been felt, no tremor registered in the temples. But the ground yawned open anyway, as if answering a silent command. Locals gathered at the edge, whispering prayers, tossing maize and coca leaves into the pit to soothe whatever had stirred. But nothing fell. The offering simply vanished, like water down a throat. The next morning, the village was empty. Not destroyed, not looted, just gone. Beds unmade, food half-eaten, chickens still in their coops, fires still smoldering. Even the dogs sat in silence, staring at the mountains with wide, trembling eyes. A search party found a single carving near the mouth of the chasm. It had not been there the night before. A symbol etched into the rock like it had been burned through with thought alone. A figure with no face, holding a bowl full of stars. The high priests, desperate now, returned to the forbidden texts, those kept in hidden alcoves of Coricancha, brought from Tiahuanaco before even the rise of Cusco. There, in faded crimson ink and soot-black glyphs, they found what they had hoped not to. A prophecy. A time when the veins of the empire would open, when the stone gods, the ones beneath the mountains, would call their blood back to the surface. Not to rule, but to reclaim, to consume. It had happened before, the scroll warned. Long before the Inca, before the Chavin, even before the Nazca lines had been scratched into the desert. Civilizations had risen, and when they reached too high, dug too deep, the earth had corrected their arrogance by unmaking them. The scroll spoke of Chinche Suyu, the western quarter of the empire, as the key. Not for its gold or its warriors, but for what lay buried beneath its lakes, a network of obsidian shafts, too straight, too smooth to be natural, plunging into the crust like needles into flesh. A great mouth was said to lie there, not a literal mouth, but something worse. A sentient wound in the world, one that remembers pain, and now perhaps had awakened to feed. Even as Spanish sails began appearing on the western horizon, the true fear among the elders wasn't conquest, it was ignition. Because something had shifted in the silence. Something had breathed, and across the empire sleepers began to speak in tongues they'd never learned. Children painted spirals in their sleep, and far in the jungle, explorers swore they saw statues walking, slow, deliberate, stone grinding on stone toward the mountains, toward the crack, toward the heart, the gold that shouldn't shine. Gold. It pulsed beneath the empire like a living vein, drawn from the bones of the mountains, melted and molded into masks, idols, goblets too perfect for mortal hands. To the Inca, gold was never currency. It was blood of the sun, sacred and untouchable by the greedy. But in secret, some whispered another name for it, Inti Wakaicha, the sun's sorrow. It was said that gold wept when torn from the earth, that the mountains moaned for each ounce removed, and that some pieces, especially the ones that gleamed without light, were never meant to be found. In the forgotten fortress of Sacsayhuaman, deep inside a chamber long sealed by obsidian slabs, the priests discovered one such artifact. A mask. Faceless. Seamless. Cold, even when touched by fire. No hammer could dent it. No blade could scratch it, but it hummed, not always, not to all, only at night, only to those who dreamed of water falling upward or stars bleeding into each other. A young acolyte who touched the mask began to speak in riddles for 7 days. On the 8th, he tore out his own eyes with a jagged stone and whispered, "They see through me now." The mask was sealed again, but the damage had already spread. That same week, gold idols from other temples began to lose their luster. Not decay, withdrawal, as if the soul of the metal had gone somewhere else. The priests tried to melt them, to purify them in fire. The flames went blue, and then black. Meanwhile, in Cusco, rumors whispered that a chamber beneath the Coricancha had been found. Not built, but revealed, hidden under layers of stone long thought solid. The space pulsed with unnatural warmth, though no fire burned. It smelled of copper, blood, and wet earth. At the center stood a golden pillar, not shaped by tools, but grown, twisted like a vine made of flame. And around it, etched into the stone floor, were hundreds of spiral symbols, interlocking, moving, not metaphorically, moving ever so slightly like breath trapped in granite. One high priest approached the pillar. He spoke a single word no one understood, Nananaku, and disintegrated into ash. No scream, no fire, just absence. The council panicked. They ordered the chamber sealed, the temple cleansed, the name never spoken again. But by then it was too late. Gold across the empire began to sing. Quiet at first, a single note, then harmony, then something worse. Patterns in the metal changed. Faces appeared in mirrors that didn't belong to the viewer. Whispers echoed through royal halls with no mouth to speak them. And on the coast, conquistadors claimed to have found a city made of gold. But they did not return to Spain. They vanished, all but one, a mad friar who arrived in Lima 2 months later, barefoot, covered in soot, repeating a single phrase in Quechua. The gold remembers who buried it. He died that night, eyes wide, smiling. The silence in the sky. At first, it was subtle. The birds stopped flying over Cusco. No hawks, no condors, not even the common sparrows that used to dart through the temple eaves. It was as if the sky itself had become sacred, or cursed. and the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was waiting. Farmers in the sacred valley spoke of strange shadows during dusk, shapes that moved against the sun. Triangular silhouettes that lingered longer than the clouds and vanished if you stared too long. Priests dismissed it as fear. But when the flocks stopped laying eggs and the llamas began refusing to face east at dawn, the council took notice. In Tambo, Colorado, a merchant caravan was found with every member dead. No wounds, no signs of illness, just their bodies laid in perfect alignment along the road, arms crossed over their chests, eyes wide open. On each of their foreheads, a circle had been drawn in ash. The investigators followed the caravan's path back into the foothills and discovered a plateau none of them remembered existing. It was smooth. Too smooth. As if the rock had been poured and cooled rather than formed. At the center stood a monolith made from black stone, humming so low it vibrated in their teeth. No carvings, no script, but those who approached it claimed to feel something in their spine, like a memory that didn't belong to them. Several vomited. One tried to walk into the stone. He broke his nose, laughed, then tried again. The empire's diviners gathered in Cusco to ask the heavens for guidance. But for the first time in living memory, nothing answered. The sacred coca leaves swirled but did not fall. Smoke refused to rise, and the stars at night, so central to the Inca's calendar and ritual, began to shift. Not dramatically, not enough for the common eye, but the priests knew. Constellations moved in ways they shouldn't. The great llama of the sky began to drift south as if pulled. The dark river of the Milky Way twisted unnaturally, forming spirals that mirrored the glyphs found on the gold pillar. The night after this discovery, thunder cracked above the Andes with no clouds in the sky. The lightning was red, and it struck the Sapa Inca's palace directly, 3 times. He survived, but the left side of his body turned completely black, as if burned from within. He would speak only one word until the day he died: Kamak. The priests, terrified, searched the archives and oral records for meaning. The name belonged to a forgotten god of creation and destruction, one who had been banished, not worshipped. A deity erased from ritual, from temple, from time itself. But memory lingers in mountains. And some gods, when forgotten, grow hungry. Worse still, those who worshipped Kamak were said to have never needed temples. They used bodies, the eyes of the dead. The Inca Empire had once been the mightiest in the Americas, with its cities sprawling like veins across the vast landscape, its armies unmatched, its gods worshipped from the peaks of the Andes to the depths of the jungle. But now, in the final days, its power was cracking. It was not the Spaniards who struck fear into the hearts of the empire. It was the growing sense that something older, something far more ancient, was waking beneath their feet. A small village on the edge of the Amazon basin, far from the seat of Incan power, became the first to report strange occurrences. It began with the whispering. At night, the villagers claimed to hear voices coming from the jungle. Voices in a language no one recognized. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. These were words, commands. The next morning, 3 men were found in the village square. They were stiff, their faces frozen in terror. But it wasn't the usual kind of death. They were still alive, their bodies in perfect condition, but their eyes were open, wide and fixed, gazing straight ahead, unblinking, unseeing. Yet there was a light in them, a kind of unnatural gleam, as though something else was looking through their pupils. The elders were summoned. They muttered prayers and prepared sacred rituals, hoping to cleanse the village of whatever curse had been placed upon it. But the night brought worse things. That same night, the earth trembled, not with the power of an earthquake, but with something else, something deeper, as if the very bones of the land were shifting. And from the jungle came a strange procession, figures draped in white moving like shadows between the trees. They made no sound, yet their presence was palpable. The villagers fled, but as they did, they saw the truth. The figures weren't moving. They were walking, but their feet never touched the ground. They hovered just inches above the earth, their bodies strangely rigid, as though they were nothing more than shadows of people who had died long ago. When the villagers returned, they found the entire village destroyed, burned to the ground. Nothing was left standing except the trees, and the ground was littered with strange symbols burned into the earth in shapes too precise, too intentional for any natural cause. And then, in the center of the wreckage, a single figure stood alone. It was the Sapa Inca himself, wearing the sacred crown of gold. His eyes were the same as the villagers, hollow, vacant, but they glowed like twin embers smoldering in the dark. He was alive, yet not alive. He moved like a puppet, but the moment anyone approached, he would disappear into the shadows of the trees. And then the whispers came, from the ground, from the jungle, from the very stone of the mountains. Kamak, Kamak. The name echoed through the air like a death knell. The diviners, those who had once held the secrets of the universe in their hands, now trembling in fear, understood. Kamak, the god who had never been forgotten, merely sealed away, was not a god of creation, but of corruption. He was the darkness that lay hidden at the center of the world, feeding on the lives of those who believed they could control him. But now, after centuries of slumber, he was ready to rise. And the Inca Empire, in all its glory and all its arrogance, had opened the door. The river that turns back. The sun never quite set in the sacred valley that night. Even as darkness crept along the jagged mountain peaks, there was a strange luminosity in the air, an unnatural glow, as though the world itself was holding its breath. For the first time, the stars in the sky refused to follow their usual patterns. The constellations that had once anchored the people of the Inca Empire now seemed to twist, slowly, imperceptibly, as though something was pulling at them from the deep places of the earth. In Cusco, the palace of the Sapa Inca became a place of whispers. Courtiers and priests, once bold in their faith, now moved like shadows through the halls. The great temple of Coricancha, which had once shone with golden light, now stood dim, as though the very air inside it had turned stale. A thick, oppressive silence hung over the city, a silence so heavy it felt as if the land itself was holding its breath. But the most unsettling sign came from the river. The Urubamba River, which ran like a lifeline through the empire, had always been a source of power and prosperity. It was said to be sacred, a gift from the gods, its waters flowing in rhythm with the will of the heavens. But now, something had gone terribly wrong. The river, the very river that had sustained them for centuries, was turning back upon itself. Not slowly, as one might expect from a shifting current, but violently. The water surged in unnatural waves, curling and twisting as though it had a mind of its own. The villagers living along its banks claimed they could hear the water speaking. The sound was not of crashing waves or rushing streams, but of something deeper, an ancient, guttural murmur that seemed to echo from beneath the earth itself. It was as though the river was weeping. And in the deepest part of the Urubamba, something had surfaced. A figure. At first, the villagers thought it was a shadow cast by the moon, but it did not disappear with the rising sun. It remained, standing in the center of the river, motionless and unblinking. As the days passed, more villagers claimed to see it. A tall, slender shape, wrapped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a dark hood. But what terrified them the most were its eyes. Eyes that shone with an eerie glow, like twin orbs of molten gold, staring at them from the river's depths. And then the disappearances began. First, a fisherman was found at the river's edge, his body perfectly intact, but his skin pale, almost translucent. His eyes, too, were wide open, staring into the sky as if seeing something no mortal could. His lips were twisted in a silent scream, but when the elders tried to speak his name, his body crumbled to dust in their hands. Within days, more bodies were found, each more horrifying than the last. The water seemed to claim them, swallowing them whole, only to return their bodies to the shore hours later, their eyes vacant and hollow, their mouths frozen in eternal silence. The people whispered the name, Kamak. Some believed it was not the god himself who had risen, but something he had left behind. A curse, a lingering spirit that had never fully been contained. Perhaps the gold, the sacred artifacts, had disturbed the delicate balance, reawakening something that should have remained buried. But others, more fearful, claimed that the very river itself had become possessed. They spoke of an ancient prophecy whispered among the high priests that the river would one day turn against the living, drowning the empire in its wrath. The name of the god who had once been forgotten was now spoken in hushed tones as they stared into the black waters. "The river is not just water," they said. "It is a mirror of the land, and now it reflects our fate." And in the deepest part of the Urubamba, where the shadowed figure stood, the eyes, those glowing eyes, were not just watching. They were waiting for something to break. The sacrifice of the sun, the Inca people. Once the proud rulers of an empire that stretched across the Andes, now faced the consequences of the curse they had unknowingly unleashed. The great city of Cusco, once a symbol of divine order and power, began to unravel. The temples fell silent, their golden walls tarnishing in the absence of devotion. The sun, worshipped as the highest god, Inti, the father of all, no longer appeared with its usual brilliance. It became dimmer, as if obscured by an invisible shroud. The world itself seemed to be turning against them. The whispers grew louder. They no longer only came from the river or the jungle. Now they echoed from the very mountains, from the stone itself, and even from the stars which had once guided the Inca to glory. At night, a strange fog descended upon the city, thickening as the hours passed, turning the air colder than it should have been. Those who ventured outside at night claimed to see figures moving among the streets, figures that looked human, but their movements were erratic, unnatural, like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. But it was not until the Inti Raymi festival, the most sacred celebration of the sun, that the true horror revealed itself. Every year, the people gathered at the sacred plaza to honor Inti, believing that through their devotion, the sun would bless the empire with prosperity. This ceremony was of utmost importance, as it marked the peak of the sun's strength and its promise of life. The Sapa Inca himself would offer the sun god his most precious tribute, the kolka, a precious offering of gold and food to ensure that the crops would flourish and the empire would remain strong. But this year, something was wrong. The high priests gathered on the grand terraces of the plaza, dressed in their ceremonial garb, their faces painted in the bright hues of the sun. The Sapa Inca, resplendent in his golden attire, ascended to the altar. He held the sacred vessel filled with offerings, ready to offer it to the sun god. The crowd fell silent, awaiting the divine blessing. But as the Sapa Inca raised the vessel, a terrible chill swept through the air. The golden rays of the sun dimmed once more, and a shadow fell across the plaza, deep and unnatural. The air grew heavy and the ground trembled beneath their feet. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The crowd gasped, unsure of what they were witnessing. And then the whispers began. The voices, those same strange whispers that had haunted the villages, rose from the earth. They were no longer distant murmurs. They were loud, urgent, and unmistakable. The people looked around, their eyes wide with fear, but there was nowhere to run. The priests collapsed to their knees, their faces contorted in terror as they listened to the words. It was not the sun, god they were to honor, it was something else. And then the Sapa Inca did something that no one could explain. He threw the sacred offering of gold and food into the fire on the altar, but as it fell, it did not burn. Instead, the flames seemed to flicker, twisting around the offering like tendrils of smoke. The gold began to shimmer, but not with the light of the sun. No, this light was darker, more ominous. It pulled at the souls of those who gazed upon it. The Sapa Inca's eyes glazed over, his expression distant as though something had taken hold of him. He began chanting in a language unknown to all, a tongue lost to time, and with each word the crowd felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispers, louder, more insistent, seemed to answer him, and then, with a terrible finality, the flames erupted into a monstrous black smoke, a cloud so dense it blotted out the sun entirely. The ground split open beneath the Sapa Inca's feet, and from the abyss came the figure who had first risen from the river, the figure in the tattered robes, its eyes glowing like molten gold. The figure stepped forward, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. And in that moment, the people knew. They had never been alone. They had never been the rulers of the earth. There were forces far older, far more powerful that had watched them from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the figure reached out, the Sapa Inca, who had once been the living god of his people, fell to his knees, his body trembling. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged, only the whispered words of the ancient god, Kamak. And then, as if on command, the earth swallowed him whole. The Inti Raymi festival, which had once been a celebration of life and light, ended in darkness and despair. The sun god, it seemed, had abandoned them, leaving the people to face the wrath of an ancient, forgotten power. For the first time in centuries, the Inca Empire realized the true cost of their arrogance, the burning of the gods. The earth trembled for days after the Inti Raymi festival. In Cusco, the capital of the Inca Empire, the once bustling streets were eerily quiet. The market stalls stood abandoned, the rich smell of food and spices forgotten in the wind. The city had been touched by something unspoken, something that cut deeper than just fear. It was a profound disillusionment, a realization that no matter how powerful they had been, the Incas were not invincible. In the shadow of the great Sacsayhuaman, where the mighty stones once stood firm, an unsettling silence hung over the empire. The people had lost more than their leader that day. They had lost their faith. The royal family, those who had survived the collapse of the ceremony, retreated behind the high walls of the palace, where the air seemed colder than before. At night, the wind howled through the cracks in the stone like a chorus of voices from the past, carrying whispers that seemed to echo across the valley. Kamak is not gone, they said. The curse is not finished. But it was not just the whispers that plagued the empire now. It was the fire. The strange fire that had burst from the altar when the Sapa Inca had made his offering. The flames had not burned like regular flames. No, they had writhed like serpents, twisting in the air, lashing out at anything they touched, leaving behind only ash and the smell of something charred, something that could not be described. A fire that had no source, no fuel, a fire that had come from beyond. The great temples of the sun were now desolate ruins, their gold dimmed and tarnished by something far darker than time. But it wasn't the loss of riches that terrified the people. It was what had been lost when the fire consumed the sacred shrines. The gods, too, had vanished, not in a sense of simple absence, but in a way that left no trace of them behind. It was as if the Inti, the sun god, and all the other gods the Incas had worshipped had never existed at all. The idols, once shimmering with life, were now hollow, their eyes dull and vacant. The high priests, who had once been the spiritual backbone of the empire, now stood uncertain and afraid, unable to interpret the signs that were unfolding before them. But most chilling of all were the visions. In the weeks that followed the Sapa Inca's disappearance, strange figures began to appear throughout the land. They came to the elders, to the shamans, and even to the soldiers. They appeared in dreams, in waking visions, or sometimes in fleeting moments of terror when the winds shifted suddenly. These figures, shadowy, distorted shapes, always held something in their hands. A mask, shaped like the face of Kamak. The mask glowed with an unsettling golden light, and whoever stared into its eyes would fall silent, lost in a trance. It was said that these figures came from the old time, from the very heart of the earth, from the time before the Inca ever rose to power. Some said they were the forgotten gods of the land. Others believed they were the spirits of the ancient civilization that had once ruled the region before the Incas. But one thing was certain: the Kamak curse was not over. It had only just begun. A shaman, one of the last to hold on to the old traditions, stood at the peak of the mountain one evening, watching the smoke rise from the distant villages. He could feel the presence of something old, something ancient, moving beneath the surface of the world. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of history. In his mind, a voice spoke, low, insistent, and filled with sorrow. "The sun will burn, and the earth will swallow them all. There is no escape. The fire you sought is the fire that will consume you." And then the sky cracked open. A great flash of light split the heavens, as if a god's wrath had pierced the earth. The people of Cusco looked up, their faces bathed in the glow of an unnatural storm. The wind howled once more, louder than ever before, and the ground shook beneath them. The ancient stones of the city trembled as if they too were afraid of what was coming. The Incas had believed themselves to be the children of the sun. But now, the sun was no longer their protector. It had turned its gaze away, and in its place something far darker had risen. In that moment, the people understood. The empire was crumbling not because of the might of foreign invaders, but because of something far older, something the Incas had dared to disturb. The gods were not gone. They had only been sleeping. And now they were waking. The darkness beneath the stones. The tremors that had shaken Cusco now spread outward, as though the very heart of the earth was stirring. It wasn't a quake, at least not in the way the people understood earthquakes. No, this was something different, something far older and deeper. The ground didn't just shake, it breathed. It rose and fell with a rhythm, like the chest of a sleeping beast awakening. The elders of the empire gathered, their faces etched with worry. It was one thing to feel the wind shift, to hear the strange voices whispering from the riverbanks, but this was something else entirely. They had heard the legends, of course, the stories told by their ancestors of the Pachacuti, the great upheaval when the world would turn upside down and the gods would return to claim what was rightfully theirs. But those were just stories, weren't they? Now they weren't so sure. Deep beneath the city, where the labyrinthine tunnels and hidden chambers wound through the earth like veins, the priests had been working tirelessly. They had discovered something in the ruins, a hidden chamber beneath the Temple of the Sun, one that no one had ever seen before. The walls, ancient and weathered, seemed to pulse with a faint glow as if the very stone was alive, feeding off something that had been sealed away for centuries. The priests, driven by a mixture of fear and reverence, had descended into the depths, hoping to understand the true nature of the darkness that had descended upon them. What they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. In the deepest chamber, where the shadows clung to the walls like thick, suffocating smoke, they found an altar. It was not like the others they had seen. Theirs were ornate and lavish, built to honor the sun god, to call forth blessings of harvest and wealth. This one, however, was different. It was stark, built of a dark, jagged stone that seemed to absorb light. Atop the altar was a massive stone slab, etched with symbols no one could decipher, and surrounding it were hundreds of small, delicate golden masks, each one intricately carved, each one resembling the face of a god lost to time. And then, in the center of the altar, was the thing that terrified them the most. A mask of a face not human but something older, something inhuman, shaped like the face of a creature that had been worshipped long before the rise of the Incas. The mask glowed with a faint golden hue, its eyes wide and empty, staring into the void. The priests recoiled at the sight, but the air around them thickened and the temperature dropped as though the very presence of the mask had drawn the coldness of the underworld into the room. One of the priests, his voice trembling, spoke the words that everyone feared. "This is the mask of Kamak. It was said to be the face of the god who once ruled the land before the Incas, the one who created the sun, and the one who will end it. The others, now pale and shaken, could not speak. They simply stared at the mask, transfixed by its otherworldly power. It was as though the mask was calling to them, drawing them in, offering a glimpse into the past, into the very heart of their empire's downfall. And then, in a terrifying moment of clarity, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. The walls cracked, and the very ceiling of the chamber seemed to begin to collapse. It was as if the mask had awakened something beneath the earth, something that had lain dormant for centuries. The priests scrambled to escape, but it was too late. The very stone beneath them seemed to give way, and in the seconds before the darkness swallowed them whole, they heard it. The low, rumbling voice of something ancient, speaking in a language none of them could understand. But the message was clear. The time of the Incas had ended. In the days that followed, the empire began to disintegrate further. The once proud Inca army, known for its discipline, its mighty warriors, and its unbreakable will, began to falter. Soldiers were seen wandering the streets in a trance, their faces pale and empty, as though they had been touched by the same curse that had taken hold of the priests. The Viracocha, the creator god, was silent. The sun itself seemed to withdraw, as if unwilling to shine upon the land that had once been its domain. Without the blessings of the gods, the crops failed. The rivers, once teeming with fish, ran dry, and the people, desperate and broken, turned on one another. Factions began to rise as each group tried to claim the remnants of the empire for themselves, but none of them had the strength to save what had once been the mightiest civilization in the Americas. And still the whispers came. They spoke of the Kamak mask, of the ancient gods, and of the inevitable end that was approaching. The people had disturbed something they could never hope to understand, something that had been lying in wait for centuries. The earth was no longer theirs to command. The shadows that came with the wind, it began in the mountains. High above the cloud line, where the air thins and the stars seem to breathe, the sacred peaks that once guarded the Inca Empire began to weep. Not with rain, but with ash. Fine black ash drifted from the mountaintops, carried by a cold wind that howled without source or warning. Villagers in the highlands awoke to find the ground coated in it like snow from another world. Their fires would not light. Their animals refused to move. And at night, the wind spoke names that no one had uttered in centuries. Those who remembered the old ways, the truly old ones, too old to walk but too wise to forget, recognized the signs. They gathered the children and whispered, "The gods have opened the door." In the city of Cusco, what remained of the royal council struggled to maintain order. The Sapa Inca himself, once revered as a living god, now wandered the palace halls in silence. He no longer ate, he no longer spoke. Servants said they saw him kneeling before an empty throne, whispering to shadows that had no source. The sun, the great giver of life, now seemed reluctant to rise. Daylight was dimmer. The skies remained overcast with a strange copper hue even at midday. Crops failed across the valleys. Water turned bitter in sacred springs. Priests offered sacrifice after sacrifice, but the gods gave no answer. Not even silence, just a low, ever-present hum beneath the ground, as if something ancient had begun to stir. And then came the dreams. Across the empire, people began to wake in cold sweats, screaming. Their dreams were all the same. They stood in vast golden halls buried deep beneath the Andes, where figures cloaked in crimson robes whispered in languages not spoken since the first sun rose. Behind them stood towering stone figures, monsters with faces carved like the moai of distant Rapa Nui, eyes empty, mouths agape in eternal hunger. In every dream, one phrase echoed like thunder through their skulls. "We are not gone. We are waiting." Some said the dreams were warnings. Others believed they were memories, surfacing now as the veil between worlds thinned. But a few, only a few, understood what they truly were: invitations. In the dead of night, a group of soldiers guarding a temple vanished without a trace. No signs of a struggle, no blood. Their weapons were still on the ground. Only a trail of black ash led from their post into the jungle, and then ended abruptly, mid-path, as if they had simply disappeared into thin air. Soon, more went missing. Children, healers, farmers, a dozen here, 100 there, entire villages gone overnight. The empire could no longer hold itself together. Roads, once full of trade and tribute, were now empty. Messengers never returned, and in the ruins of forgotten cities, travelers found cryptic carvings freshly etched into stone walls. Symbols matching none of the known scripts, always the same. 3 eyes, 1 mouth, a sun swallowed in shadow. The Spanish, still far away on distant shores, had not yet set foot in this part of the world. And yet the fall had already begun, not by sword or fire, but by something older, by something beneath, by something the Incas had disturbed. The whispers now reached even the lowest valleys. Farmers claimed they heard singing in the soil. Children said the rivers spoke their names. And everywhere the wind carried that same chant, soft, rhythmic, inescapable. The sun must fall for the door to open. The Inca priests, desperate for answers, turned to forbidden rites. They sought out ancient temples long sealed by their forefathers, temples too dangerous to worship in. Inside, they found more than ruins. They found murals of creatures not of this world, battling gods with human faces. They found bones, not animal, not human, but something in between. They found warnings, carved into obsidian in languages lost to time. And they found the truth. The empire had not been the first. It had only been the latest, the first empire that fell. Long before the rise of the Inca, before even the first stones of Cusco were laid, the Andes had already tasted empire and seen it crumble. High in the mountains, hidden beneath glaciers and jungle overgrowth, archaeologists have found evidence of vast ceremonial sites far older than anything attributed to the Inca. Megalithic blocks, carved with impossible precision, lie scattered across forgotten ridges. Blocks too large to be moved with the tools of their time or even ours. And beneath them, spiral staircases descend into caverns untouched by light for millennia. What little is known of this ancient civilization comes not from inscriptions, but from fragments whispered across generations. Stories carried in the chants of Quechua elders, in the dreams of shamans, and in the forbidden verses once locked within temple walls. They speak of a people who did not worship the sun, but something deeper, something beneath. A source of knowledge and power that pulsed in the belly of the earth, alive, aware, and hungry. They called it Ukupacha, the inner world. While the Inca would later revere the sun god Inti and build temples to the heavens, this older empire built down. Not toward the gods above, but toward the gods below. And they paid a terrible price for their devotion. According to a hidden codex, found in the ruins of an unnamed site near Lake Titicaca, this first empire was destroyed in a single night. The skies turned black, the stars blinked out, and then the mountains screamed. A tremor unlike any before split the land. Entire cities vanished into the earth. Witnesses wrote, scratched desperately into stone, that the mouths opened and the watchers returned. The gods they had once served came not to bless them, but to reclaim what was theirs. Only a handful survived, fleeing into the jungle, where they swore to never speak of what they had seen. But trauma has a way of passing through blood, and over centuries the story endured, twisted and diluted into myth. The Inca dismissed it as superstition. They built their temples atop the ruins of the old ones, convinced they could tame the land, erase its memory. But some things do not forget. A few priests knew the truth. Secret rites were passed in darkness, always in silence, always in fear. The deepest chambers of Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, held more than gold. Beneath the altar, a sealed stone door marked with the three-eyed sun was never to be opened. One inscription was all that remained. To awaken them is to end the age. And still, the Inca dug deeper, hungrier for power, obsessed with conquest, with knowledge, with immortality. They believed they were gods, but they were trespassers. And the first empire, though fallen, had left the door open. Now, centuries later, when archaeologists like Dr. Samuel Price uncover fragments of civilizations erased from history, they often find similar signs. Earth that burns to the touch, stonework fused as if by heat no fire could produce, and always the same symbol, the eye within the sun, carved not to glorify, but to warn. One theory, quietly passed among only the most esoteric circles of academia, suggests that the Spanish conquest did not destroy the Inca Empire. It interrupted something much older, something darker, that perhaps, had the conquistadors not arrived when they did, something unspeakable would have risen from beneath those sacred stones. A few go further still. They claim the Spanish didn't conquer the Inca. They rescued the world from what the Inca were about to unleash. And now, with the Andes shifting, the glaciers melting, and the ancient tunnels exposed again, the same tremors have returned. The same black ash, the same whispered dreams. The watchers are stirring, and the door may not stay shut for long. The gold that disappeared, gold. To the Inca, it was not currency. It was not wealth. It was sweat of the sun, sacred, divine, a material gifted by the gods. They covered temples in it, sculpted animals, rivers, even ears of corn out of it. Yet when the conquistadors stormed the empire in the 16th century, driven by a hunger that bordered on madness, something didn't add up. The legends spoke of mountains of gold, of cities gleaming in eternal sunlight. El Dorado, they whispered as if the name itself was cursed. But when the Spanish raided Cusco, sacked temples, and tortured royalty, they found gold, but not nearly as much as the legends promised. Not enough to match the scale of Inca mythology. Not enough to justify the obsession that gripped explorers and monarchs alike. So where did it all go? In 1533, as Francisco Pizarro held Atahualpa captive, the Inca emperor offered a ransom so vast it defied imagination. One room filled to the ceiling with gold, two with silver. The Spanish agreed. The Inca began to gather the treasure. Caravans of men, llamas, and carts moved in silence across the Andes. But something strange happened. Only part of the ransom ever arrived. Then the gold vanished. Some say the Inca, realizing the Spanish would kill their emperor anyway, diverted the final shipments. They took them not to Cusco, but somewhere else. A hidden chamber, a forbidden valley, a system of underground vaults sealed with obsidian locks. No Spaniard ever found them, and no Inca ever revealed their location. Not under pain, not under fire, not under death. One survivor, a monk named Father Luis de Rojas, recorded a final confession from a dying Inca priest. His parchment was discovered centuries later in a Jesuit archive in Quito. The priest spoke of Capac Ñan, the great Inca road, but described a second path. One not built for travelers but for sacrifice. He claimed the gold was not hidden, but offered. Lowered into caverns so deep the air itself wept. Poured into wells that led to the heart of Ucupacha, an offering to the ancient ones sleeping beneath the mountains. They asked for the light of the sun, the priest had written, and we gave it to them before the white men could steal it. A theory emerged in modern times. What if the gold was never meant to be seen again? What if it was part of an ancient pact, one made long before Atahualpa was crowned? And yet, from time to time, whispers surface. A hiker in Vilcabamba stumbles upon a sealed stone door deep in the jungle. etched with glyphs no one can read. A tremor opens a mountain crevice, revealing gleaming veins, not of ore, but sculpted deliberate forms. A face, a mask, a sun. And there are stranger things still. In 1969, a U.S. geologist working near the Apurimac River took a core sample from what he thought was natural rock. Inside, he found traces of pure gold, refined beyond modern capabilities, shaped at molecular levels as if it had been melted by thought. He sent it to a lab in Lima. Days later, he disappeared. No body, no trace, only his field journal remained. His last entry read, "It's not buried, it's waiting." Whether hidden by surviving Inca loyalists, consumed in ancient rites, or offered to gods best left unnamed, the lost gold of the Inca remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Americas. Its absence haunts treasure hunters, archaeologists, and secret societies alike. But the question lingers. What if we're not supposed to find it? What if it's guarding something or sealing it in? And if that seal ever breaks, what else might come pouring out with it? The empire beneath the empire. Beneath the Andean peaks, where condors circle above shadows older than history, lies something deeper than ruin, something older than empire, older than the Incas, older than even the gods they worshipped. Archaeologists have long puzzled over the cyclopean stones of Sacsayhuaman, massive, seamless blocks fitted so precisely not even a razor blade fits between them. Each stone weighs dozens of tons. No wheel, no mortar, no iron tools. Yet there they stand, as if placed by fingers that understood the language of the earth itself. In 2023, a seismic event struck near the ruins. It was minor, barely felt by the villages, but it opened a fissure near the base of a sacred hill. A team of local researchers descended. What they found was not soil or rubble. It was a stairway. Carved into the bedrock, worn but deliberate, it spiraled downward for nearly a mile. No record of it existed. No Inca text spoke of it. And yet, it had been there all along, beneath the flagstones under centuries of silence. At the bottom, a chamber, walls of smooth obsidian, symbols glowing faintly when touched. Not etched, but grown, like veins in crystal. In the center, a sarcophagus of polished gold, floating inches above the floor, untouched by time or dust. No body inside, only ash and a single carved sun disk, its center hollow, its edges scorched. The team recorded everything. Then, one by one, they began to suffer. Nosebleeds, nightmares, a sense of being watched by something that breathed through stone. One researcher vanished without a trace. Another was found wandering naked in the highlands, whispering in Quechua, a language he had never studied. The site was sealed. The government said it was unstable, but word leaked, whispers of an Inca vault, a hidden empire beneath the empire, not of gold, but of knowledge, or something older than knowledge. Theories swirled. One suggested the Incas were not the builders, but the inheritors, caretakers of a force buried for millennia. Another posited the site was a prison, not a temple, that the gold, the ash, the sarcophagus were all part of a seal, a containment field, not for a god, but for a mistake. And then there was the final theory, the most unsettling, that the Inca Empire was allowed to rise, that it was taught, shaped, guided, not by men or deities, but by something sleeping beneath the Andes, a presence that gave knowledge in exchange for worship, that fed on order, on empire, on sacrifice. But when the Spaniards came, when the blood offering turned to chaos, the pact was broken, and so the empire fell. Not by sword, not by plague, but by abandonment. The gods turned away, or worse, went back to sleep, waiting. And now, centuries later, cracks appear in the old seals, earthquakes in patterns, disappearances without explanation, echoes in empty caves, And beneath it all, still pulsing, still whispering, a voice without a mouth, murmuring through stone and fire, "Return the sun, or darkness will take its place." The Inca Empire is gone, but what lies beneath it has never left.